So SEO is all about beating Google in a lot of aspects. We want to rank pages, we want to get people, our clients, maybe yourselves, ranked for various keywords that will drive traffic to your site. We know that Google gives us some information, they give us some basics about what a site should look like and how a site is crawled, and you're going to hear Bill Slawski talk a little bit later about crawling in more detail. But Google is somebody who isn't going to give you all the information. They're going to give you as much as they want, and they can change the game whenever they want. Right? So if you look at the Google Playbook, we know that they have algorithm updates. They're like 500 a year at this point. There are just so many. The latest was Penguin. Before that, you have Panda. They're doing everything they can to squash spam. So if you're engaging in antiquated link building tactics like spamming directories or spinning articles or anything like that, it's just something that you should definitely steer away from. It's not scalable, and it's not going to benefit you in the long term or your clients. There's obviously a brand association. If you do a search for Apple, the first result's going to be the brand Apple, not the fruit. Right? Authorship, talk a little bit about that. That's where you basically tell Google that you wrote this. It's your piece of work. So when it's doing its calculations, it's doing its ranks, it says this person is a trusted source. So if they wrote this, that means it must be pretty good. And if they went and commented on another site or +1 another site, that site must be a trusted source because I trust this person. So that gets into the whole author rank thing, which is kind of a piece of the PageRank puzzle. At least we believe it is. All right, freshness. We know that the query deserves freshness protocol. That's when something that's brand new, just because it's new and because it's trending, can outrank other pages that would normally push it down in the ranks. So when you look at something that's fresh, you think about a news story, a hot topic that's trending, maybe sports teams, maybe the football scores, whatever the case may be. Normally those other websites would outrank the current website, but just because it was fresh and talking about what people were searching for at that particular time, it got to rank higher. And of course, speed. Google is obsessed with speed. It wants to provide its users with the best possible user experience. So the faster your site, the better. Basically, you want to make your site faster than any of your competitors. And we see that time and time again. The results for pages that come up at the top usually load from 1 to 2 seconds max. A little bit more about Google is someone recently released a document from quality graders. Quality graders are humans that take a look at a website hired by Google, and they grade whether or not the results were what should have been expected. Was the page that ranked, did it meet these quality guidelines? So what that means is regardless of the algorithm changes, what's going to happen in the future, as long as you maintain that thought that you're not optimizing to beat the algorithm, but you're optimizing to meet the ultimate need of the intent of Google, which is to deliver quality content to its users, right? So that SEO means, for Google at least, that Google is the ref, right? Right? Google is also the stadium. That's where we play, right? Okay. So Google is the game, and they make their own rules. So that kind of puts us in a tough spot. I mean, these guys are telling us one thing one day, the next day it's something completely different, right? So what this means is that you have to be agile. That's why we named this meetup group Agile SEO. You can't just assume that the latest trend or the latest fad is going to be around forever, because in a couple of months it's likely to go away. And the only way you can beat the algorithm is if you play to the intent and not to the algorithm itself. Deliver quality content, you hear it time and time again, but it's no joke. If if you don't deliver it, whatever you're doing is not scalable and ultimately will be susceptible to algorithm changes. Okay. And then the other side of that, besides Google, you also have your competitors working. Your competitors are building more links, they're generating content, they are engaging people socially, they are building brand awareness, they're catering to all these things that Google likes, right? So if you want to win for a keyword, you want to beat a competitor, you need to do these things better than they're doing, right? And if you try to do it the old way, you try to build a whole lot of bad links and you fake Google Plus profiles and Facebook profiles, ultimately you're going to lose because you can't keep up the momentum that a naturally ranking website with a good brand following gets. Okay? Content generation. Do you have a constant message you're delivering at least on a weekly basis? Do you have a blog that you target to a specific audience that talks about things that people want to read, not stuff that's just filled with keywords, filled with stuff that's relevant, at least from a grammatical standpoint, but it's something that if they read it, they're going to want to share it with their friends. And if your competitors are doing that and you're not, that doesn't leave you with much hope in outranking them. Okay, so in your campaign, how far do you have to go? How much work do you have to do? I mean, that should be the first important step of determining where you're going to go, where you're going to take your campaign. Okay? And, well, that depends on where you've been, right? If your domain isn't even indexed anymore, you have a long way to go, right? If you've been hit with one of those wonderful unnatural link warning messages in Google Webmaster Tools, you have a long way to go, right? Then you have our animal friends, penguin and panda. Penguin update, most of you know, it's anti-spam. Google's trying to crack down on unnatural linking and over-optimization of pages. And Panda is all about thin content and content farms. So if you have any of these issues, you've already started farther back from the line of scrimmage than everyone else. And you have a longer way to go. Okay? So no one knows this better, in my opinion, than Dr. Pete of SEO Moz, right? So I wish I had someone in this industry when I first came in who said, Chris, you need to follow this guy. Chris, you need to follow this lady. She knows what she's talking about. This person has the experience and the backing to help you make better decisions that are scalable and that are going to stand the test of time in any Google algorithm updates. This guy, Dr. Pete, he's the one who manages the Google algorithm change history for Moz, which is something that we reference pretty extensively. We want to make sure that everything we do isn't impacted by this kind of stuff. So I definitely recommend you follow him on Twitter and you visit this and bookmark this page because it is updated frequently. In addition to this, I don't have it here, but there is a Mozcast application, and I think it's mozcast.com, where it shows you how much of a flux there was in search engine in Google rankings. Stormy, meaning there was a lot, things like that. Okay, so if we look at our on-site playbook, let's assume that we don't have any of those penalties. If we had any bad links, we cleaned them up, we straightened it out, got rid of all of our duplicate content, and now we're back to basically square one. So now we're on even keel with the competition, and what do we have to do now to outrank them or pass them on the field, at least from an on-page perspective, right? So you want to make sure, number one, your site can be crawled and indexed in its entirety, without duplicate content, without spider traps, without anything that's going to impede the search engine from seeing all the content on your site that you want it to see, all right? Again, you want to make sure that each page is unique, that each page can stand by itself. If the content is too shallow, if it can't stand by itself, that means you're at risk for a panda slap. Right? You don't never think of it, but unique page titles, also URLs, and the file names of your images and your other files all should contain keywords in at least a natural sounding way without sounding spam. And code architecture, microdata authorship becoming even more important, where you essentially, Google will assume whatever it wants to assume unless you tell it otherwise. So if you think about the robots.txt file that goes in the root directory, if you don't tell it to disallow a certain directory, it's going to spider that directory. Just like with on-page stuff, if you don't put in a meta description or if you don't put in a page title, and even if you do put in a page title, Google will decide what it thinks goes there. So when you talk about architecture and microdata, things like that, you are filling in the pieces, taking away that ability to assume. So things like schema.org, if you mark up your website, so you have a small business, it has a location, and it has a small business name and a phone number. Normally you might just put those on the page, one after the other, in maybe a paragraph format. Well, if you mark that up in a certain way, the spiders know that this line actually means something. This number that I'm seeing is actually representative of a phone number, which then it could use later on to show up in, Google Places, Google Plus, what have you, right? Okay, those who went to SEO MozCon saw a lady speak. She actually just did a Whiteboard Friday not too long ago on mobile SEO, and it was phenomenal. I mean, the stuff that I read in this one document was powerful. It was fun, but it was all about how to manage an SEO project from beginning to end. And because it was fun, it got a lot of views, it got a lot of shares, and there is a piece of content now people will share and retweet and share again. So this has become a resource not just for the content that's on it, which is excellent, but also because of the fun factor, right? I mean, I'm a geek, SEO is my thing, talk about SEO all the time, but Star Wars kind of goes hand in hand with that, so it just makes sense. So she basically created something that caters to a very large but targeted audience. Okay. So now if we think about, we've got our content straight, we don't have any penalties, we did everything we can from a microdata, microformatting code structure standpoint. What's next? Well, we have to look at what the competitors are doing off-site, right? So we have to make sure that we are building links in a natural way. The best way is to create something like Aleda did, which was something that people want to link to. Every piece of content you write, you should be thinking that, is this something that I actually want to read, or that other people want to read, right? And there are other ways while you're doing that, you want to make sure that your business is listed in, quality directories, local business directories, places like the Chamber of Commerce, places you can outreach to that are not like the directories that say 123easylink.com directory, because we know that those aren't good. We talk about guest blogging, everyone should be familiar with that. It seems to be oversaturated, but a lot of people don't do it right. A lot of people don't get very selective when they pick what blogs they're going to allow their content to appear on. You own that content, right? So whenever you create content for a guest post or a guest article site, mark it up with your authorship markup, right? Get some credit back from that besides the link that goes back to whatever the target URL was. So you can add your authorship to anything you run on the web, no matter where it is. Relationship building, that's really, that's really the core, I think, in terms of building quality links. You're not reaching out to say, hey, can I get a link back to your site or my site? It's really good content, but it's about discovering what that person likes, what they're talking about, understanding that person's audience, and then providing them with content that matches all of those things. And then you don't just have one link, you have a relationship that you can go back and build more links for. And of course you have awesome content. We always talk about awesome content, content is king, I hate that phrase, but it's true, it stands the test of time. And content isn't just text on a page, right? Content is stuff that you create that goes on the web. It could be a video, it could be an infographic, it could be a meme, it could be anything. So when you think about what you're creating, think about who your target audience is. Is it something that they're going to want to read and they're going to want to share, or is it something that they're just going to assume that you wrote it just to have some content on your site? Right, Matt McGee, search engine land, and he owns smallbusinesssem.com. He's been in the business for a very long time. I wish I had known more about his stuff when I was doing some small business stuff a couple years ago. He is the master at small business SEO. Follow him if you have a small business or you do work for a small business. Excuse me. Okay. A lot of people might recognize this gentleman, Ian Laurie. Not only is he smart, but he is clever, witty, and if you follow him on Twitter, expect to laugh pretty much all day. Beyond that, if you look at what he does from a content standpoint, he is one of those guys who can identify what it is that's going to make someone move, or it's going to make somebody pay attention. So when he's writing content, he's focused on what the person is likely to feel on the receiving end, right? Which is really important. He knows that his blogs need to tell a story or people aren't going to read it. And you can better believe that once you go to his blog and you read through some of his stuff, it almost speaks out loud, right? It's similar to, if you know Lisa Barone she used to work for Outspoken, that kind of writing style where you read it and it just takes on a life of its own. So this content that you write, definitely follow Ian, and that's something that you can get from him. Okay, Ross Hudgens, probably the smartest link builder I know on the planet. This guy has just come up with some of the best ideas from a link building standpoint. Scalable, easy to implement, easy to understand, and they're going to last through any update you can imagine, right? So some of his stuff gets a little long-winded, like me, but if you go to his site, check out at least Scalable Link Building, because this stuff will change the way you think about how you're building links now. And again, these are just people that I wish I had known when I first got into SEO. When you come into SEO, you kind of have two paths. You can come in and you might be tempted by the black hat stuff, the easy fixes, the easy wins, spinning content, building massive amounts of links, or you can go with the white hat side, and you can go and build everything, perfectly in line with Google's guidelines and things like that. I actually prefer the middle a little bit, only because Google doesn't tell you everything. So if you follow these people, expect that you're going to get some tactics that are something that you can proudly tell Google about. That's not going to get you in trouble with any algorithm update. It's not going to get you in trouble if someone from Google spam team looks at your site. Okay. In addition, McRemy, you see him online on Twitter all the time. He put up a post for 101 internet marketers to follow. I think it's a really good list. I think it's something that if you're just getting into the industry, you should check out, follow everyone on there, and send me a tweet at Chris Countey and let me know what you think. If you have any questions, be happy to answer them. Right. Thank you guys very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Bill Slawski and I work at WebiMax. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I came up to New Jersey this weekend and visited my parents up in Central Jersey before I came here, and they asked me what I was speaking about, and I told them I'm going to talk about crawling. They didn't quite get it. So we're going to go through some of these first slides in the group really quickly. All right. So there are three main aspects of what a search engine does. It crawls websites, it takes what it finds on those sites and it indexes them and it sorts them and so on. And then it shows them to searchers. And sometimes it can do some interesting things from what it finds on the pages to what it shows in search results. But robots, when they first came on the web, when people first started to have websites, people started writing programs to crawl those websites, to index their content, to do other things with them. Go ahead. So these programs had different names. You know, and so you had browsers that looked like this. This was Mosaic. It was one of the really, really early ones, and it didn't show pictures, and it only showed text. And this is actually a little bit later version of it. This was like 1997, but 93, you didn't get pictures. You just get lots and lots and lots of words. Go ahead. So this group of people came up with this mailing list, and they said, we got to do something about this invasion. These people keep on knocking our servers down. It's all these robots come, they take, and they use up our resources, and people can't visit the pages. So this guy, who was in his teens at the time, so anytime you see a web post that says a teen can't be a major SEO, link builder, or whatever, this guy developed one of the protocols we follow today, which is robots.txt. It's the old user agent asterisk disallow / well, you don't want that one because nothing will get searched, nothing will get indexed. But you can identify which directories have spider traps, which directories you don't want indexed with a disallow file. A lot of websites don't use them, but I think it's always a good idea to at least put something in there and think about whether or not the directories on your site should be crawled by a search engine. Also, sort of develop something called a politeness protocol. Search engines, other programs realize if they visited a website too much and they tried to grab as many pages as they could, it would be the equivalent of a distributed denial of service attack. They would just knock it out. Nobody else would be able to visit. So they said, okay, we're going to limit how we crawl sites. So this was the data center. My site was hosted on it had a backhoe operation disaster. They added another line into and out of the data center. This wouldn't happen again, but it wasn't a good excuse when I found out about why my website was down the day this happened. Okay, so this guy may be recognizable. Before he founded Google, or while he was starting Google, he wrote a paper about web crawlers. And it was actually one of the papers that influenced Google and what they did and how they visited web pages. And it said there's certain things that are really important. We'd rather crawl the home pages of 2 million websites than crawl 1 2 million page website. We're going to try to identify things that are important. We're going to try to crawl the most important things first. So, okay. So, certain words would start a crawl. A search engine might start with the word computer and look for pages that had something to do with computer, and then follow links on those to other pages, and then other pages, and so on, and collect URLs, collect anchor text. These pages that were important would have lots of links pointing to them, lots of links pointing from them, high page ranks in the cases of pages that had already been crawled, because pages get recrawled. Also, they would try to focus upon pages that were in the root directory of a website, the home page, and so on. Those tend to be more important. If you ask a search engineer how deeply they'll crawl a website, they say, well, don't make it so that you have more than like 3 slashes. in a URL. Don't make it that many directory level steep. We want to emphasize the places, the pages closer to your home page. That doesn't mean put every page on your website in the root directory, so you have no slashes or one slash after the domain name, but it does mean, you know, keep it limited. Don't go out like 8, 9, 10 directory levels deep. You go out. So, you know, these types of pages, New York Times, NASA, Wall Street Journal, tend to be the ideal pages for Google. They have lots of links pointing to them. They have high page ranks, so on. They're important pages. That doesn't mean other web pages, the Mount Laurel Daily News, and so on, don't get crawled. It's just, these tend to be more important. Go ahead. So Google started coming out with a number of patents involving crawling, involving anchor text, involving how they sort through stuff. If you really want to dig into the details, they're kind of ugly. They have lots of legal language, but they give you lots of clues about how the search engine works. And if Google comes to a web page, it makes a big list of all the anchor text it finds associated with links. It identifies how many times different links appear in a page. It may identify where all the redirects are, the 301, 302 redirects. This patent oddly said, for some reason, when Google finds a 302 redirect, it'll go directly to that page. It'll save the URL, see what else is on the page. For a 301 redirect, it won't do that. It'll put those aside, maybe you'll wait a week or two. No idea why, it doesn't explain that. But there are a lot of things like that that tend to be unexplained in what the search engines do. So this is an even earlier browser. This is links. If you go to Google Webmaster Guidelines, they tell you, pretend that Googlebot is like this program, links. It can't see pictures. It can't read text in images. It doesn't handle JavaScript. It doesn't do lots of other stuff like that. If you have all these things on your website, Google may have problems crawling your page. But you know, there are other signs from the search engines that have been around for a long time, says that their crawlers are smarter than that. There's one program Microsoft came out with, one algorithm called VIPS, which is a visual segmentation process, which says, go ahead, that a search engine might break a page down into parts. It might be able to identify which is the header, the footer, the sidebars, and the main content area. Yahoo and Google have both come up with segmentation processes, algorithms as well. And it's most likely that when you have a link or content in this area, in the main content section, it carries more weight than content in the other parts of pages. A link passes along more page rank if it's in that center main content area. The words are more relevant for that whole page if it's in the main content area. And this is kind of scary looking abstract. It came from IBM. As far as I know, nobody else is using this, but this was granted in the year 2000. And it's for a crawler that acts like a web browser. It can read pictures and images. It can do other stuff. All the things that Google says in the Webmaster Guidelines today, 2012, that a browser can't do. So, you know, this was a dozen years ago. And the reason why the search engines may not be doing this or may not be doing this much is because it costs a lot of money. It's computationally expensive for a search engine to try to use optical character recognition on all the pictures, the words that they see in pictures. Now, this is a question that tends to come up every once in a while in SEO blogs and other places. What happens when a search engine sees more than one link on the same page to the same page? Now, if it has different anchor text, does the page being pointed to become relevant for both sets of anchor text? This was IBM came out with a patent that says they do something called link merging. When they see the link to the same page more than once on the same page, they might try to identify if there are similarities between groups of links. So if you have main navigation on top of a page and you have footer navigation on the bottom of the page, they identify those as navigational or structural links and say, okay, we're just going to merge these two groups together. They only count as one link. If they see content type structures, where they point to other pages, same site, different sites, and so on, they might say this is a different type of group. And we might count those once. If there are two of them and they have different types of content, we may count both groups independently as links. And then there's some that are just sort of isolated. They don't belong to groups. Okay, so we know search engines crawl. We don't know how well they're going to crawl. We do know they do things like collect the cached copy of a page so that you can look at it when the page is unavailable, which is a pretty true, realistic representation of the page that may not be available when you catch on the catch copy at Google. So what types of things can we do to make it easier for a search engine to crawl our pages, to understand the content on our pages? Okay. So one of them is search engines like it when there's only one URL per page. And you can set up your page using the content management system, using other things, so that there are lots of different URLs for the same page. So all of these are the same URL for one page, the home page of a website. And different things make a difference. The trailing slash at the end, the file name that doesn't have to be, because it's a default file, it doesn't have to be included. Whether or not your files or folders are capitalized or small letters, and so on. These are all the same page. And if you go to a lot of websites, you may see the logo pointing to one version, a link in the main navigation at the top pointing to another version, a link in the footer navigation at the bottom pointing to a third version. It's like, you gotta be consistent. Choose one, make it the canonical, the shortest. If you like www, include that in all your links. If you don't like it, leave it out, but be consistent. Okay, search engines agreed to a standard, something called the canonical link element a couple years ago. And they said, if you include this in the head section of your web page, and you identify which page it actually is, the canonical version, that's the one we'll try to use. If we see other links, other URLs in different types pointing to this page, end up at resolving at this page, we're going to try to identify it as this canonical version. We may try to treat this as if it were like a 301 redirect, and we may try to pass along page rank to it. So most SEOs have always sort of looked at this as if it were a Band-Aid. It's like, this is what you do when you can't get all the URLs on a site to just point to one page. But it's more useful than that. Sometimes you have sites pointing to pages including tracking codes on them. You see like a ampersand and then a UTM equals 1534, whatever. Search engine might follow a link that lets it see that URL and see the tracking code on the page. And it sees that the canonical link doesn't have the ampersand UTM stuff on it. So it says, okay, that's just like tracking code. We're gonna give credit to the link to the canonical version. Okay, so what happens when you have an e-commerce website, you have products, and products are being shown at like 20 products per page, and there are 30, 40, 20, 50, 100. You have a little pagination at the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rel equals per even, rel equals next tags were intended to group together those pages that are related to pagination pages as a series to make it easier for a search engine to associate those pages together. And the way it does is in the head section, you include these different prev next tags in the series so that your first one only has the next, your last one has a prev, and everyone in between says which is the next, which is the previous. Okay. Now this is true for article pages too. When you have a page that's broken up, an article that's broken up into multiple pages, and you may have at the bottom of the article 1, 2, 3, view all, whatever. If you use prev and next, it tells the search engine this is related. These are together. Okay, so here's a paginated product pages. We see at the bottom, page 1, page 2. Okay. And here's an article page, and there's pages 1, 2, and view all. Go on. Okay, so view all is interesting when you have an article because Google says there are two ways we could handle this. We actually prefer to show people view all pages. We want to show the whole article all on one page. Now, some people don't like that. So they came up with two options. And one of them, you use a prev and next in sequence, the way they're supposed to. You use a canonical link pointing to each of those pages, the same URL. So page 1 URL has a canonical with the page 1 in it. A page 2 URL has a canonical with the page 2 in it. And you do a no index. Rel equals no index on the view all page. The opposite one is you use the prev and next rels and you use the canonical for the view all page, and you don't no index it. What this does is when a search engine displays results with this one, with the view all, it's most likely to show the view all page. If either text from the page 1 or page 2 is relevant for the query, it'll show the view all. On this one, it's most likely to show the front page, the first page of the series. Especially when you have something where you have similar content on top of the page, on multiple pages, and you have additional stuff on the bottom. Like, you came across this example earlier today in discussion, where you have multiple tabs for a page. So you have maybe a description of a restaurant, then you have a tab for maps, a tab for reviews, a tab for menu, and you have 3 different URLs associated with each of those tabs. So you might do a prev and next for each of those pages. But Google is probably going to show the main page, the front page, the home page, if you use this first option. Okay, okay, if you have a site that has the same content in different languages, or it has the same content sometimes in the same language, okay, in different languages like this one, United Nations, the English version, United Nations, the Spanish version. Some websites will have Spanish in the menu but have English text. You can still use this. What href does is, go ahead, it tells the search engine that these are the same pages, they're just in different languages. So somebody searching in Spain wants to find the United Nations homepage in Spanish, they just have to search United Nations. They'll most likely be brought to the Spanish version of the page. In the United States, they'll be brought to the English version. So the href helps make sure that people who have preferences for different languages get the right page. It's the same content, just in different languages. The thing I like about it is you can do this in an XML sitemap, like this, so you don't even have to recode the pages. You do have to create a complicated sitemap. This is the first part of it. This is for the English version of the page. You also have, this is showing English, Dutch, and German. Okay, there's another part of this which is for the Dutch, and then another one for the German. This is 1/3 of it. That's just for 3 pages. So if you have a really big site with lots of different languages, this XML sitemap can get really big. But you don't have to recode the pages. You just have to make a sitemap, which can be really useful. And I was talking about XML sitemaps. XML sitemaps are a way to create an alternative for search engines to crawl web pages. It's a bunch of information about pages on your website that can be discovered without a crawler actually crawling your pages. There's certain things that you want to make sure you do with it when you create one. You don't want to include broken links in it. You want to use the canonical versions of all pages. You have a choice to set priorities, times to revisit and stuff like that, and look at pages and so on. Certain lengths of time, you can do it for a month. You can do it longer. I recommend you don't do it longer than a week. If you have more than 50,000 URLs in your website, you create a site index, and you have multiple sitemaps listed in that. There are XML sitemap validators that you can use to make sure you haven't made any errors, and it's always good to check that before you publish it. You can include a statement, a sitemap statement in your robots.txt file. It tells people where your sitemaps are at. So Google came out with a paper in 2009 where they talked about crawling versus the use of sitemaps. And they said back then that they were discovering pages on a website a lot faster using sitemaps than they were crawling. And it was a substantial amount. And it said 78% of these URLs were seen by sitemaps first, compared to 22% that were seen through discovery or crawling first. So sitemap, if you have content you want to be found quickly, it's useful to have that. I didn't break this down into Google News sitemaps, into video sitemaps, into image sitemaps, but there are specialized sitemaps now that help your content be found more quickly, and they're definitely worth exploring. Okay. Yahoo came out with a patent not too long ago that says, we're going to crawl social media. We're not going to index the links in them and give them page rank and stuff like that. They've all got no follow on them. But for things that are really recent, like an earthquake happened last night, 2 hours ago, whatever, a lot of people tweeted about it. Some news magazines picked up, wrote stories about it. A lot of people on Twitter linked to it. This helps them discover those URLs. It doesn't, the algorithm it ranks things on doesn't run on PageRank. It runs on social people power. It runs on, these are things that are really popular, mentioned a lot, and we're going to use them. Crawling doesn't necessarily have to be about discovering links, about capturing content. And go on to the next one. Okay. Before we get to that question, I was talking up front really quickly about another approach that's used with crawling. Google came up with a project in 2005 called Web Tables. And what the Web Tables project was the search engine would look around on websites for tables that weren't just laid out. They didn't determine how the page was laid out. They were data web tables. And, well, and what the search engine would do was it would try to find similar tables across the web. So if you had a table that involved the presidents of the United States, it had a column with all the presidents, then it listed their dates of birth, their political affiliation, the years that they were president, and so on. Search engine will say, okay, I'm going to take this information, I'm going to store it, I'm going to keep it, I'm going to look for other tables about presidents of the United States. I'm going to see if I can join together a whole bunch of information, factual information about these entities. And you may have heard of Google's knowledge base, how they're showing information next to search results about different things. You type in a person's name, John Wayne, it'll show you a list of movies. and things like that. They're using tables as a source of knowledge, of semantic information. They want to take that information, compile it, build it up. If they see the same tables with some of the same information over and over and over again, their confidence level in the veracity of that information increases. So they see a table with the presidents of the United States, the same dates of birth for all of them, 99% of the time. There's a good chance that's the date of birth of that president. So when you type into Google, when was Ronald Reagan born, they grab that information from the tables. They put it there. And they have a good sense of confidence of that's the date of birth. So crawling isn't just about indexing web pages, it's also about search engines gathering facts. Okay. Do we have any questions? Yes?
I've got two if I can cheat. The first is, do canonicals and authorship tags, they have to be in the header tags, or will Google still pick up on them if they're somewhere else on the page?
Okay, the canonicals should be in the header tags. Right? That's where search engines are going to look for them.
Okay.
The authorship markup has two parts usually. One of the parts is the link back to the profile
Okay.
with the badge. The link back to the
the
profile.
signature area.
Right, and what's happening there is sort of another type of crawling. You're not building a link graph or concept map of content found on pages. You're building a graph of authors who are verified by the search engine and what content they created, wherever it's been created. The URLs for Google Plus or your Google account,
Right.
or like digital signatures. So
Okay.
so part of that's in the head section, and then part of it's elsewhere on the page, and you have the rel equals author and the rel equals me.
Yep.
Those things appear elsewhere on the page.
Okay. If you also got to structured data a little bit, if Google's looking for tables, things like that.
Right.
I know that they'll use that to enrich your SERP result.
They'll include query refinements and things like that based upon that type of information. They'll with the knowledge-based stuff. For a while, there was a Google product called Google Squared, which would give you a spreadsheet with that type of data. They discontinued that, but they included it in the query refinements and so on.
Okay. Are they actually rewarding people like by ranking them higher if they do have heavily structured sites?
I sincerely doubt that.
Okay.
I think, though, that's for the table type structures, or for like semantically, when you title a page, the title and all the words on the page are like equally distant or related to each other. When you use headers, the words in your header are equally distant to the content being headed. You do have the schema type stuff. What that does is it makes it a whole lot easier for a search engine to say with certainty, this is where this page says it's from. If you include an address, name of place, street name, city, state, zip code, and it's just a big blob of text, search engine has to look at it and say, that fits a pattern that looks like a postal mailing format. That's probably an address. With the H-card stuff, with the other schema stuff, you're labeling it. So you're making it easier than possible for a search engine to say, this is the street this business is at, this is the zip code. Okay. I'll throw one more in then. I saw a paper last week, the page was down. I don't know if it had to do with GoDaddy crumbling under the weight of an anonymous attack earlier today or not. It was an academic page, so it probably didn't. But there was a paper that came out last week called Sentimental Spidering. And what it tries to do is crawl web pages and look at the text, like 25 words this way, 25 words this way, around a link, and see if it expresses positive sentiments, negative sentiments, and stuff like that. And the purpose behind something like this would be for an individual, or a business, for other people, to tell whether or not things expressed about them in links, things referring to them, were positive or negative. So, you know, that's something that reputation management companies would love. So crawling isn't just about finding those links. Sometimes it's about finding out things about them. You know? Thank you, everyone.